CPS workers of Reddit, what was the worst case you have ever seen? Hi guys, it's Em. This video is about stuff a little more triggering for some, with many mentions of child abuse and the R word. So if this isn't your kind of video, no problem, we will see you in the next one. Let's get into it. Story 1. I got a good one. Well, not good. You know what I mean. Back in my mid to late 20s, I worked as a CPS agent. Specifically, I was the type to be sent to scope out living areas to see if it was suitable for the child. I think the worst living situation I've ever seen was this. So I get called to this place. The report states that the house this family is living in isn't suitable for the child. It's pretty vague, as they tend to be on my end. So I go to the place. It's a really small house in the middle of nowhere, Texas. This house looked like it had been abandoned for the last 100 years. It was essentially just the husk of a house. Rotting wood, barely stable. There isn't really a front door or front wall, so I let myself in. I'm really confused because there's no way anyone could live here. There's no cars, no signs of life. I decide to walk around the outside of the house to make sure. In this distance, I see something that doesn't look like it belongs in a Texas desert. I walk towards it a good mile away. I get closer and notice that it's a tent. Actually, it's 3 tents all next to each other. Crappy tents at that. There's a bicycle leaned against one of them that's missing a wheel. There's trash everywhere, mostly beer cans and cigarette butts. There's also plenty of food wrappers, hypodermic needles, and what appears to be used toilet paper. The area smells atrocious. I approach the front of the biggest tent and can hear people's voices coming from it. The voices have thick southern accents and they sound weak, for lack of a better word. I can only make out 2 distinct voices. They both sound like adults. I stand in front of the tent and just say, "Hello? Anybody home?" I understandably scared them because I hear "what the" come from the inside of the tent. A very skinny looking man, likely in his late 20s, unzips the tent. He is completely naked and is holding a small beat up kitchen knife. He looks high out of his mind. He asks very politely, "Who the F are you?" From inside the tent, I can see that there's a woman crouched in the corner of the tent, also high out of her mind. Couldn't even tell if she was fully conscious, but the baby she was nursing certainly was. I said, "Hello, my name is Agent OP, and I work with the City Youth Protection Services. I've been called here about a poor living situation regarding children. Sir, do you have any children here with you?" I'm extremely scared at this point. I'm in the middle of the desert, and the only item of self-defense I have is a taser. I try to keep my composure, though. He lowers his knife and steps out of the tent, still completely naked. He said, "Frick, man. Thought you were here with the government to take my kids and guns away. I'll give you a tour of the place if you want." I am dumbfounded at this point, but I follow him as he walks over to unzip one of the other tents. Inside, I see 2 children. One is unresponsive, laying face down in the corner of the tent. Looks to be around 5 or 6 years old. The other one looks to be around 8 or 9 and is laying in the corner playing with a Walkman, without a tape or headphones in it. These were obsolete even back when this happened. I asked him if he was okay to ask his kids a few questions. He said, "They don't talk much, but sure." I poked my head into the tent and asked the kid playing with the Walkman and asked, "Hey, what's your name?" He doesn't answer. I ask his assumed father if it's all right if I tap him on the shoulder to get his attention. He said sure, so I did. The kid looked at me with a blank expression on his face. I can immediately tell that this kid has severe developmental problems. I ask, "Hey friend, what's your name?" He doesn't respond. I then tap the other kid who's laying down on a blanket. He turned over and his face was completely covered in bruises. Looked like he straight up went through a fight club. I asked him what his name was. He said, "Devin." I asked him where all the bruises came from. He looked at his dad, then went back to going face down into the blanket and started sobbing. I couldn't get his attention anymore. I stood up from the tent and looked at the father. I asked him what was in the other tent. We started walking over to it. As we did, I noticed this horrible smell coming from it. He unzipped it and I saw a girl who couldn't have been older than 4. There's a corner of the tent that is lower than the rest of it. It is full of urine. Like to ground level, just full of urine. She's in the corner of the tent playing with some dolls. I stand up, tell the man that I'll be right back, just have to grab something from my car. I return to my car and call the local police. I tell them who I am and what the situation is. They asked if I felt safe stalling until the police showed up. I said yes. I talked to the father about not much in particular. I asked him why he thought the government was coming for his kids and guns. He went on this long, incoherent rant about how ever since he moved here, he feared that he was going to lose his guns. I asked him where he kept the guns, and he said he kept them under the floorboards in the rotting house. Around this time, the police showed up. 3 patrol cars full of cops drove out to the tents. The man didn't even turn around or notice until one of the officers told us to put our hands up and drop to our knees. They get processed, the kids get put in foster care. As it turns out, the couple were biological siblings and heavy meth, heroin, and crack users. Jeez, those poor kids. I don't even want to touch on the inbreeding stuff, as this might have been a possible reason for the one child's developmental issues, as inbreeding can be a cause of this. That being said, these living conditions, if you can call them that, are just atrocious. It seems like the guy was more concerned about losing his guns and his kids, too. OP and so many other CPS workers are so much stronger than I am, because this kind of call would have just broken me. Story 2. I've worked in child welfare for 7 years. I'm changing some of the details in the story, so genders might not be right, ages may be off, just to keep confidentiality. 1. Toddler discovered in blood. Her bio-parent's partner had murdered bio-parent, then contacted one of their kids from a previous relationship, reason unknown, to help clean up, and then kills that kid. Then apparently not giving a damn about the toddler, the partner kills themselves. Friends of the older kid came by a few hours later and were worried when no one answered the door. They could hear the toddler screaming inside and called the police. Police broke down the door and the little one ran to them, just covered in blood. 2. Sibling set of 5 was removed because of domestic violence arrest of the dad. The 4-year-old is covered in bruises and it's learned he was regularly intervening when the dad was beating the mom and taking the mom's beatings. The girls were all wearing several layers of pants. Later, they learned the father was sexually abusing them, and the girls were wearing layers of pants in the hopes that he would not sexually abuse them. The poor girls were like 9 and 10. The 3-year-old's teeth were rotting out of his head from neglect, and he had to have like 5 to 6 teeth pulled. I think the dad also killed one of the family pets in front of the kids. He went to prison. 3. Dad gets released from prison, where I'm pretty sure he was R-worded, because his personality was completely different according to family members. And he proceeds to start beating and R-wording the mom. She finally calls the police after a couple of months and gets him out, but doesn't end up being cooperative. Very common due to the trauma of the abuse, and the charges are dropped. Mom never gets treatment from the trauma she experiences and ends up acting very erratic around her children. She threatens to stab them while brandishing a knife, screams at them, the works. One of the kids responds very poorly and starts being violent towards other people. She was little, 7 or so. She tried to strangle an elderly family member. She threw a toddler into a wall. She strangled a cat and stomped another cat to death. Finally, a family member has enough, and child welfare steps in. By the time I got the kid, she's been in group homes for years. Eventually, we got her into transitional housing, and she finally stopped attacking people and destroying property. 4. Report comes in because a 3-year-old has an STD, and they come to find out dad had been sexually abusing all 5 children. I think the oldest was 8 and the youngest was a baby. I learned what decreased folds means, and I wish I never learned about it. I wish I could say those kids were doing all better now, but the 2 still in my unit are in group homes and have serious mental health issues. 5. This one wasn't mine, but a police officer responded to a frantic 911 call from a woman. He arrives on scene and the woman, the aunt, had discovered a 3-month-old infant being R-worded by her father, with the child's 13-year-old brother also naked in the room. Apparently, the father had been forcing the 13-year-old to have relations with the baby, too. Look, I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I had to take a break from recording this because it got to me. I want to have a career and all, but I want to be a mother more than anything when I get old enough. So when I hear about the way these people treat their kids, it breaks my heart because I just want to show all these kids the proper love they deserve. So to anyone with a kid or niece or nephew, go show them some love because kids truly are innocent and don't deserve these sorts of things. Story 3. Not CPS, but I worked in partnership with them. In all of these cases, CPS workers were on my side and their leadership was against them. They had far, far too many cases to be safe. I witnessed a physical assault on a child. It was incredibly violent, and the parent could have broken the child's neck while I was watching and moving towards them. I dialed 911 and stepped between them. I was later reprimanded for putting myself at risk. If the parent was willing to do that in front of me, what were they doing when no one could see? The state did not move them into foster care because they were too old, and the oldest kid could watch out for the younger. I had an 11-year-old threaten suicide and refused a safety contract. We called crisis intervention. They did not come out because if she didn't have a safety contract, there wasn't a bed within 8 hours or so that could take her. And if they came out, they were responsible for her. I stayed with the client for, I think, about 14 hours. I had a biofather return to the home after prison time for R-wording his daughter. They had the girls follow extensive safety procedures instead of tell the parents he couldn't return. There was likely a return to the sexual abuse. The state did not want to initiate a removal because she was old enough to learn to protect herself. I had a client with birth defects because he and his mother were the product of incest. The grandfather R-worded his much younger sister, the mom was the result. He R-worded her, and my client was the result. He was following the pattern of sexually aggressive behavior and kept being returned from the facility where he was being treated, right back to the family where he was being abused. It was absurd. As a side topic, if you're struggling with drug addiction and think you're still a good parent, you aren't. That's your addiction fooling you. Get your kids into therapy and let them live elsewhere until you get yourself clean. Story 4. The one that hit me the hardest was before I actually started going out on my own and was shadowing the after-hours team. We got a call from a different state worker about a family who had moved to our state and we needed to follow up. The family had 6 kids and the barely 12-year-old girl in the family was a registered sex offender. At 12. It was heartbreaking. It was a blended family, and the mom, who was the bio parent of the girl, believed that the girl had been exposed to porn and sex by her bio dad. Anyway, one night one of the kids said the girl's name touched him. The parents, shocked, talked to each kid individually, where they all disclosed that she had touched them. Not knowing how to handle it, they called CPS in their state for help. CPS came out, called the cops, and for reasons that weren't clear to me, the child was placed on the registry by a judge. In my experience, usually they try inpatient and other therapies before going that route, but apparently that state and judge did things differently. So when the family moved to our state, we had to go out to make sure the family was following adequate guidelines. For example, the girl was not allowed to be alone with her siblings. She couldn't swim in the pool at the same time as her siblings. She couldn't go to school or the park or birthday parties because she was a sex offender. Her siblings couldn't have friends over. She was such a sweet kid. It really was such a sad situation. She told us she wanted to be a fashion designer, and her favorite thing to do is play Xbox with her siblings. All the kids were in therapy, and they appeared to harbor no ill will toward her. I think about this case a lot, and I always wonder what happened to their family. So this is defined as COCSA, or child-on-child sexual abuse. I went through it when I was younger, and eventually after some therapy, I was able to forgive the girl, because I realized the only reason she personally did it to me is because it happened to her from a parent. So while I'm not saying this 12-year-old is justified at all, I do think there are better ways to try and help her than just to demonize her immediately. Story 5. I'm a CPS investigator, so I'm the front line of all the allegations. Here's some background just so you understand what my obligations are. Our state splits it up into 2 divisions, DHS and the state police, who have their own division. The state police get up the worst allegations, such as sexual abuse, immersion, severe physical abuse, and infant deaths. DHS gets the most run-of-the-mill, like cuts, bruises, welts, striking a child on the face or head, and any kind of neglect. Medical, educational, environmental. I work for DHS. And here's the kicker. The state police can't do a removal. So if they feel a child is unsafe, they have to call us, and we reassess, then make a removal based on our decision. The worst case I've seen was a secondary response for the state police in order to do a removal. An 8-month-old girl was being watched by her mother's boyfriend. The mom drove rigs for a living, so she was gone for long periods of time. The baby pissed off the man enough that he dipped her. We call it baby dipping. It's a thing. Prepare yourself. He got water boiling and put it in the tub, then put the baby in the water? She had extensive burns over 70% of her body. That baby's gonna have those scars forever. And to put himself there, he got pissed off, put water to boil, and waited it for it to get hot. Waited all that time, knowing what the hell he's gonna use it for, and then did it. Heard her screaming and then took her to his Podunk Regional Hospital. She had to be transported to the state's Children's Hospital. Then someone else had to call her mother and tell her what her boyfriend did to her daughter. And the worst part is, you get used to all that. Story 6. My case was slightly different from what many would think can be the worst. I had a report about an incorrigible child. Pretty normal stuff. Parents tried everything, but they cannot control their child and are worried about the safety of their children. This particular case was slightly different. The child and her 2 siblings were adopted by their grandparents. The grandparents stated that the one child, let's say her name was Ellen, was threatening to hurt her sibling and actually went as far as to chase him around with a knife. Ellen was a 12-year-old at the time of this report. After further investigation and services with the family, I learned the full reason for the original adoption. When Ellen was younger, about 6, with her mother, she was being sexually abused by the mother's boyfriend. When Ellen's mother found out about the abuse, she murdered the boyfriend in front of Ellen and had Ellen help her clean up the mess. Now the grandparents are unable to figure out why Ellen is troubled now. After talking to Ellen more, she was angry at her younger sibling for being normal, as he was also present for the murder but too young to remember. As I last kept up with the family, the grandparents and siblings left Ellen behind and moved to another state. Ellen is currently living with a foster family and is doing much better. I'm happy Ellen is doing better, and maybe that was the only way for her to do better was to be away from the sibling. But honestly, it sounds like the grandparents just gave up on her. And I can't imagine the turmoil that probably caused Ellen. I feel like the other children might grow up too, resenting the grandparents when they find out why Ellen acted the way she did. But maybe that's just me. Story 7. I didn't work in CPS, but I did work closely with CPS. I worked for a nonprofit emergency shelter for children who had been abandoned, neglected, or abused. Mind you, I worked at the shelter 10 plus years ago, so the details are a bit fuzzy. I got a call one night. I worked the graveyard shift. About 2 male sibling groups coming in. They had been found and picked up at Motel Drive. The oldest is 11 and the other is 9. I started reading their case file, and there's a long history of abuse and neglect. After being with us a few days, the 11-year-old is showing increased signs of PTSD, hypervigilance, paranoid, aggressive. He ends up pulling a knife on another one of the kids in the shelter because they came up from behind and grabbed him. Apparently, the mom, who was a heroin user, was prostituting the 11-year-old out to John's so she could get money and heroin. He would stay awake all night in the motel while she was out of it on heroin, to make sure none of the Johns came back to hurt her and her younger brother. By the time the kid turned 12, he'd been expelled from 3 different elementary schools and was banned from that particular school district. Eventually, mom lost custody, and the last I heard is that they were placed in foster care. Story 8. Late to contribute, but I thought I would add. I'm a neurosurgeon, not a CPS worker. The case was infantile R-word. The true disgust, however, is when you consider the mechanics that result in the degree of injury. Child was flexible but weak. In the effort to R-word her, both hips were grossly dislocated. A child's orifices are obviously too small for such, so the stuff must be severely torn. He entered the rectum at least a few times, resulting in tears and colonic perforation. The vagina and cervix were torn as well, and the uterus was severely damaged. The baby, to deal with the crying, may have been hit against an object, resulting in multiple rib and spinal fractures, as well as a depressed skull fracture. I have been in neurosurgery for over 10 years, and this was the only time I let out a tear and vomited violently. The infant did not survive. I did not have the heart to follow up on the perpetrator, for I feared my reaction if I were to learn he got away, or if I did not agree with the punishment. Story 9. Not a CPS worker, but I was an abused child. My mom's husband began molesting me at 13. This continued nightly until I finally called the cops at 17. The CPS agent was so calm and comforting and missed all the drama. Told me no matter what, I could call her and she would be there for me. Anyway, the cops told me I was a slut and asked for it. My mom never believed me. I ended up living in an abandoned house for 5 months until I gave it and went back. Put a deadbolt on my door. He started R-wording me when I was 18 because I was legal now. I'm 25. Still jump when I hear things behind me. Still have nightmares and extreme anxiety. My mom is still married to him, even after watching him beat the crap out of my younger brother and knowing what he was doing to me. She believes I seduced him. He's a meth junkie now and will probably ruin my mom's life. I wish every day I'd called that kind CPS agent. She warned me that may happen. I know reaching out for help can be scary, but if anyone is going through this right now, please call someone for help. Whether it be CPS or just a friend to stay at their place until you can get professional help. Anything will be better than staying in that situation. This boyfriend and mom are horrible people, and I hope they get what is coming for them. Story 10. One of my uncles was a CPS worker for a good amount of time before he just couldn't do it anymore. And I can remember 2 cases that he brought up while at a get-together. 1. Mom was sending her 6 to 8-year-old daughter over the border to Mexico on a bus, where she would be picked up by pedophiles who would keep her for a few hours before sending her back with payment. 2. Dad was R-wording his 16-year-old son to the point that he had developed a defense mechanism that involved pooping on himself to keep his dad away. He ended up having to wear adult diapers after CPS took him, because his defense mechanism became his go-to for whenever he felt scared. Story 11. Not a caseworker, but worked at a foster care agency for a while. Craziest case I heard about involved a kid that was very difficult to place, because he had a bad habit of stealing cars with a long rap sheet that was entirely stealing cars. The foster family he was placed with had their car stolen by him twice and had a meeting with the caseworkers about it. Well, while the caseworker was there, the kid managed to sneak out and steal the caseworker's car. He drove it to the park because he decided he wanted to go to the park. The kid was 9. I'm pretty sure they moved him to a group home after that. Story 12. Not a CPS worker, but worked for a psych office contracted by CPS to interview and test children and parents under investigation. Interviewed a mother accused of burning her 11-year-old across the face with an iron. I only saw pictures, but I couldn't sleep that night. The mother had dead eyes and spoke in a creepy monotone the entire time. Only referred to her child as the younger one, because she had an older child as well, apparently. These kinds of stories just baffle me and leave me a little mixed when it comes to how I feel, because part of me wants to think from it from all angles. Like if the mother had a mental illness issue or something. But then also it never is justification for hurting a child. So then I just feel sort of stuck as to what the right way to feel is. Story 13. Not CPS, but juvenile justice. My favorite is a kid who came into my office and told me, "I'm sorry, sir, I can't talk to you. My mom told me to never talk to white people. His parents jumped him into the gang before he hit puberty. His first run-in with the law was when his mother abandoned him as a distraction when she was being chased for shoplifting." Story 14. I don't work for CPS, but my girlfriend used to work for them as a receptionist and a filing clerk. Someone got drunk and left their kid in a baby carrier on top of a stove. The burner was not all the way off. She quit after she had to make copies of all the documents, read photos in that case.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.